3 governments. 6 continents of operational reach. 41 years of accumulated leverage built one quiet decision at a time in rooms that do not appear on any public record. You are eating breakfast alone. Soft-boiled eggs. Toast cut in triangles the way your mother made it when you were 7 years old in a house in Antwerp that no longer exists and that no biography has ever correctly identified as your actual origin, because you spent considerable resources ensuring the biographies begin in London where the money became visible rather than in Antwerp where you learned what money actually was. Your phone is face down. Your assistant knows not to enter before 9. The morning newspapers are on the table, but you have already read everything in them that matters because everything in them that matters was set in motion by decisions you made between 4 and 6 days ago, and reading about your own decisions in newspaper language is an exercise you find mildly interesting the way a composer finds it mildly interesting to hear their work played by an orchestra that does not know who wrote it. A prime minister called last night. Not your prime minister. You do not have a prime minister. You have 3 governments and none of them govern you. This specific prime minister called because a budget allocation he needed passed through a parliamentary committee yesterday by 2 votes, and those 2 votes exist because a conversation you had 8 days ago with a man who knows a man produced a result that the prime minister experiences as political fortune and that you experience as procurement. You told him you were glad it worked out. You said this warmly. You meant neither the gladness nor the warmth, but both landed correctly, and the prime minister hung up satisfied, and the satisfaction of prime ministers is a resource like any other, renewable if managed carefully, depleted if taken for granted. You finish your eggs. You turn your phone face up. The day begins. Chapter 1. How Antwerp Made You. Your father repaired watches. This is the fact that every unauthorized biography gets right because it is the kind of origin detail that feels constructed and therefore reads as authentic. A watchmaker's son who built an empire. The metaphor writes itself. Precision. Patience. Understanding how small components produce large outcomes. Every profile uses it. You have never corrected it because the truth is more useful kept private, and the metaphor is close enough to functional. What Antwerp actually made you is this. It made you a person who understood from age 9 that the world had 2 operating layers. The visible layer where transactions were declared and rules applied and outcomes were attributed to effort and merit and the correct alignment of publicly stated forces. And the layer underneath where the actual decisions were made by people who understood that visibility was for other people, and that the most consequential choices produced no public record because the people making them were careful enough to ensure it. Your father knew a man. This man was not a watchmaker. This man moved between the visible and invisible layers with the specific ease of someone who had been born knowing both existed and had spent his life learning the connecting passages. He came to your father's shop on Tuesdays. He and your father talked in the back room with the door closed. After he left, your father was always slightly more relaxed in a way that the money he left behind explained only partially. You watched this for 4 years before you understood it. When you understood it, you were 13, and you did not say anything about understanding it. You simply filed the understanding in the place where the right information lives and waited to find out what it was for. It was for this. For 41 years of Tuesday backroom conversations conducted at increasing altitude until the rooms had no doors because rooms with no doors cannot be surveilled, and the conversations produced outcomes that moved parliaments and markets and the specific arrangements that most people call geopolitics and that you call the management of conditions. You left Antwerp at 17. You took 2 things. The watch your father made you understand from the inside out, every component, every function, every relationship between a small movement and a large hand. And the understanding of the 2 layers. Everything else you built from those 2 things. Chapter 2. What 3 governments means. People use the word own. You do not use the word own. Ownership implies a legal relationship, and legal relationships produce records, and records are the mechanism through which the visible layer asserts control over the invisible one. What you have with 3 governments is something more durable than ownership. You have mutual dependency structured so that the dependency is asymmetric in your favor, and the asymmetry is invisible to anyone outside the structure. The first government came through infrastructure. A country whose port facilities required capital that no legitimate institutional source would provide at the timeline the government needed. You provided the capital through 4 entities across 3 jurisdictions. The port was built. The government's economic position stabilized. The terms of the capital arrangement included provisions that a contract lawyer would describe as standard, and that an experienced operator would recognize as the architecture of a relationship that does not end when the loan is repaid because the loan is structured to never be fully repaid on terms that do not require your continued involvement. The second government came through information. A specific piece of intelligence regarding the political opposition of a sitting administration that you held for 14 months before the moment when holding it became less valuable than deploying it. The deployment saved a government. The government knows it was saved by information. The government does not know the information was held for 14 months or that the timing of its release was calibrated to produce a dependency rather than simply a result. They believe in a debt of gratitude. You hold something more durable than gratitude. The third government is the most elegant. You did not approach it. It approached you. A delegation arrived through intermediaries with a proposal that was framed as an investment opportunity, and that was actually a request for the specific kind of private authority that a government needs when it requires something done outside the channels through which governments officially operate. You provided it. The arrangement expanded. It has been expanding for 7 years. What you have with the third government is the closest thing to partnership that exists in your portfolio, which means you have 40% of the leverage rather than the 60 or 70 that characterizes the other two. You are working on the remaining 30 over a timeline of 4 years. Chapter 3. The morning something moved. On a Tuesday in March your breakfast is interrupted. Not by your assistant, who knows not to enter before 9. By a call from a number that has never called this phone and that you know anyway because you know the 12 numbers in the world that would call this phone and this is one of them. The voice belongs to a man named Soren who manages the European operations of an entity whose formal existence is a consulting firm in The Hague and whose actual function is the coordination of interests across the financial and governmental overlap that produces the conditions you depend on for the third government arrangement. Soren does not call casually. Soren calls when the architecture of something has shifted in a way that requires your attention before it requires anyone else's. He tells you about a committee. A parliamentary oversight committee in a country that borders the third government's territory and that has, through a combination of genuine investigative competence and fortuitous document access, begun asking questions whose answers, if pursued to their natural conclusion, would illuminate a portion of the third government arrangement that you have kept in the invisible layer for 7 years. Not the full architecture. A corner of it. But corners, examined carefully, lead to edges and edges lead to the full shape of things, and the full shape of this particular thing is not something a parliamentary oversight committee is equipped to encounter without consequences that would extend well beyond the committee itself. You eat the last triangle of your toast. You ask Soren 3 questions. His answers tell you the committee has 3 members who are driving the inquiry, that the document access came through a source inside the third government that you will need to identify and address separately, and that the timeline before the inquiry produces something public is approximately 6 weeks if nothing changes. You thank Soren. You hang up. You turn your phone face down again and you think for 4 minutes about the corner and the edge and the full shape of the 7-year arrangement, and what 6 weeks means in the context of a problem that has a solution requiring only the correct sequence of smaller solutions applied in the correct order. Chapter 4. The sequence. The sequence takes 11 days. You do not touch any of it directly. This is the fundamental discipline that 41 years has built into the architecture of everything you do. The distance between your decision and its visible outcome is always populated by enough intermediate steps and independent actors that the line from cause to effect, if anyone ever tried to draw it, would require a level of access and patience and specific expertise that the people most motivated to draw it do not simultaneously possess. The 3 committee members. One has a professional history that contains a period of ambiguity regarding the sourcing of a research grant that produced his initial political reputation. The ambiguity is real. It was not manufactured. You simply knew about it and held it, and the holding is now useful. His involvement in the inquiry becomes less active within 5 days through a process he experiences as a personal decision to prioritize other committee responsibilities. The second member's inquiry depends on a specific document that arrived through a chain of access you trace back to a junior official in the third government's trade ministry. The junior official's access to that document required a security protocol violation that is documented in an internal system the third government shares with a partner organization whose data infrastructure is managed by a firm you have held a non-public interest in for 3 years. The document's access history is amended within the chain of custody in a way that does not alter its contents, but does alter the official record of who retrieved it and when. The second committee member's evidentiary foundation becomes legally complicated. The third member is the most competent of the three and the one whose continued involvement concerns you most. You do not address her directly. You address the committee's institutional support instead, the administrative and research resources that translate a motivated legislator's interest into an actionable investigation. Those resources are subject to a budget process. The budget process is subject to a committee whose composition includes two members whose names appear in the first government arrangement in a capacity that gives you a specific form of influence over their professional priorities. The third member's investigation continues but proceeds slowly, without resources, in the specific frustrated manner of someone who knows what they are looking at and cannot get anyone to look with them. 6 weeks becomes 6 months becomes a different political cycle with different priorities and a committee whose inquiry appears in the record as inconclusive. You file this outcome in the same organized place where you file everything. You make a note about the junior official in the third government's trade ministry. That note will be addressed on a separate timeline. Chapter 5. What answering to none costs. There is a conversation you have with yourself on the last Tuesday of every month. This is the only meeting on your calendar that has no other attendees and no record and no agenda beyond the specific honest accounting that 41 years of operating in invisible layer requires if you are going to remain the person who manages it rather than the person it manages. You think about what answering to none actually means. The word accountability exists in your vocabulary but applies differently than it applies to people whose consequences arrive through institutions. Your consequences arrive through outcomes. A sequence that fails. A dependency that inverts. An arrangement whose asymmetry is discovered and corrected by someone with the patience and access to correct it. You have managed all of these in 41 years. The managing itself is the accountability. You answer to the quality of the architecture. You think about the three governments. The port and the capital structure. The 14 months of held intelligence. The 7-year arrangement and the corner of it that a committee found and that 11 days of sequence removed from immediate danger. You think about the Prime Minister who called last night feeling lucky. You think about your father's back room on Tuesdays and what you understood at 13 about the 2 layers and what 41 years of living entirely inside the lower one has made of the understanding. The watch is on your wrist. Your father made it from components he understood individually and in relationship and as a system. He could hold any part of it and tell you its function and its dependency and what failed when it failed. You have tried to build everything the same way. Components understood individually and in relationship and as a system. The system runs. The large hand moves. Most people see only the hand. You finish the last Tuesday accounting. You turn your phone face up. Your assistant will enter in 4 minutes. There are 7 calls before noon with people who believe they are calling you because the relationship is mutual and the conversation is professional and the outcome is negotiated between parties with comparable standing. You let them believe this. The believing is the mechanism. The mechanism is the system. The system is what 41 years built in the space between Antwerp and here, between a watchmaker's son and a man who eats soft-boiled eggs alone in a room that no public record correctly identifies while 3 governments manage their affairs in ways they experience as sovereign and that you experience as Tuesday. The assistant knocks. You say come in. The day continues.